I'm going to start with a poem from Nightingale. It's the first poem in the collection, and the only thing you need to know about it is I was thinking about the ways in which we come to rely so deeply on natural things, you know, wildlife, trees, things like that. We just had a massive hurricane that tore down all of these old and beloved trees, and you don't know what you miss until they're gone. But this is a poem ostensibly about one of the trees that I think about all the time because it faces my window. It's an apricot tree, and I meditate on it a lot. This is called Psalm. Too soon, perhaps, for fruit, and the broad branches ice-sheathed early may bear none. But still my neighbor waits with her ladder and sack for something to break, a gold, a lengthening of light. For the greens to burst into something not unlike flame, the pale fruit blushing over weeks through the furred cleft creases, a freckling of blood. Then the hot, sweet scent of August rot, drawing wasps and birds and children through the month. So much abundance and the only cost waiting. Looking at the tree, I almost expect the sound of bells, a stone church, sheep and flocks, but no sound of bells, no clarion call. The church is far down in the valley. This tree should be an ancient, revered thing placed at the heart of a temple. Instead, it is on a common lot beside a road, apartment buildings, a dog sleeping in its yard. My neighbor has come here neither as master nor supplicant. She simply plans to fill a plastic sack with whatever she can take, the sweet meat giving under the press of a thumb, covering what is its true fruit, the little pit, hard and almond brown that I've scooped out, palmed, and planted to no avail. A better gardener could make demands of such a seed, could train a tree for what desire anticipates. But here the tree grows only for itself. And if it bears no fruit for the killing frost, or if it flowers late because of a too warm winter, what debt am I owed? At whose feet should I lay disappointment? Delight, no more comforting nor wounding than hunger. The tree traffics in a singular astonishment, its gold tongues lolling out a song so rich and sweet the notes are left to rot upon the pavement. Is this the only religion left to us? Not one only of mortification or desire, not one of suffering, succor, not even of pleasure. The juice of summer coils in the cells. It is a faith that may not come to more than waiting. To insist on pleasure alone is a mark of childishness. To believe only in denial, the fool's prerogative. You hunger because you hunger, and the tree calls to this. But the fruit is real. I have eaten it, have plucked and washed and cut the weight and stewed it with sugar and lemon peel until the gold ran rich and thick into jars. I have spooned it over bread and meat. I have sucked it from my husband's fingers. I have watched it sour in its pots until a mist of green bubbled up for a crust. I have gathered and failed it as the tree for me both ripens and fallows. But now it is perhaps too soon for fruit. The winter this year was hard, the air full of smokes. Do I know if spring reached the valley in time? Who planted this tree? How long has it stood here? How many more years can such a thing remain? My neighbor reaches a hand up into the branches, palm cupped, weighing the leaf knots. She is looking to see what instincts, what weathers still grow here. She snakes her hand through the greening branches. Up from the valley come the golden tongues of bells. This poem is a little painful, so I apologize. The poem is for my grandmother, who I was really close to, and she died fairly recently. She was able to commit euthanasia. I'm not sure if that's the correct phrasing of it, but she had a brain tumor. And so this is a poem about the last week that I got to spend with her before that happened. The wolves. It was the week of asking to watch her eat, asking if she understood the doctor's questions, asking her to explain the difference again between wanting to die right now and dying later. The tumor making certain answers unquestionable. I watched her point to the incense dish from which someone swept all the ashes up, asking if she recognized us. Because that is what the living want, thinking it is a sign we have been loved. But the answer was a summer drive, a mountain, piles of leaves beneath which a wolf slept, suckling her pups. Some deaths are good, and it makes them hard to grieve. She was, at times, in great pain. We wanted her to die too. That was important. But first, we wanted her to remember. From the bed, a finger pressed into its pile of leaves, gray haunch, unmovable ashes. I didn't want to disturb their tableau, she told us, and drifted off, and we did not know the meaning behind this. The wolves must have looked so comfortable to her, wordless, and in this wordlessness, perfect. Did she want to go there too? I could point to the image and say, my father must be in there, my uncle, or the wolf is you, you are still the mother, as if necessary to name that self at the end of its world. An animal cry, memory. That was our selfishness, as death was hers. She insisted upon it, and why not? It was good for me to get a chance to know you, she said, who had known me my entire life. Then the pills, a small handful crushed into juice. She was happy then. We all were, or said we were. What is the difference now? I'm going to read a poem that probably no one would think is a climate change poem. But in a way, to me, it is. I lived in Hanoi, Vietnam for a little bit, and I visited Halong Bay, and there was an oyster farm there. And the waters are heating up. They can't actually produce pearls anymore in these oysters because the oysters are dying. So they've learned that they can actually take the seed grit from an oyster and put it into a mussel, which can live in much warmer temperatures and thus keep the pearl trade alive. This is called vessels. Shouldn't it ache, this slit into the sweet and salt mix of waters composing the mussel? Its labial meats winged open, yellow fleshed, black and gray around the tough adductor. It hurts to imagine it, regardless of the harvester's denials, swiveling his knife to make the incision, one dull cyst nicked from the oyster's mantle, its thread of red gland no bigger than a seed of trout roe pressed inside the mussel's tendered flesh. Both hosts eased open with a knife, as if anything could be said to be eased with a knife, so that one pearl after another can be harvested, polished, added to others until a single rope is strung on silk, linked by what you think is pain. Nothing could be so roughly handled and yet feel so little. Your pity turned into part of this production, you with your small, four-chambered heart, shyness, hungers, envy. What in you could be so precious you would cleave another to keep it close? Imagine the weeks it takes to wind nacre over the red seed placed at another heart's mantle. The muscle, become what no one wants to. Vessel, casein, wounded into making us the thing we want to call beautiful. Can't remember anymore if this, okay, I'm going to read something short and hopefully amusing, and then something long and kind of dirty. This is called Intimacy. And the only thing you need to know is that for a while I was somebody who was training to be a medievalist. And one of the things that always kind of fascinated me was the question of the rapture and the second coming. Basically, in Christian theology and Catholic thought, when the second coming comes, the dead will rise again and join. And there was a lot of medieval theologians who were anxious about that question, which is, which body do you get? If the soul and the body are rejoined, do you get the young, healthy, good-looking you, or do you get, you in illness? Do you get you as a baby? At what point? So I found myself kind of mulling over that question, and then also just thinking about Jeff Goldblum, because one does. And this is called Intimacy. Intimacy. How horrible it is. How horrible that Cronenberg film where Goldblum's trapped with a fly inside his material transformer. Bits of the man emerging gooey, many-eyed, bits of the fly worrying that his agents screwed him. I almost flinched to see the body later that's left its fly in the corner. I mean, the fly that's left its body, recalling too that medieval nightmare, resurrection, in which each soul must scurry to rejoin the plush interiors of its flesh, pushing through, marrying indiscriminately, because heaven won't take what's only half, one soul blurring forever into another body. If we can't know ourselves, if we can't know the boundaries between ourselves and life, what will they be in death? Corrupted steadily by maggot, rain, or superstition, by affection that depends on memory to survive? People should keep their hands to themselves for the remainder of the flight. Who needs some stranger's waistline, joint problems, or insecurities? Darling, what I love in you, I pray, will always stay. The hell away from me. So Nightingale, I'll just read two more poems and then I'm out. Nightingale is a book of poems that sort of reimagines a response to Ovid's Metamorphoses. You don't actually have to know any of the myths in Ovid's Metamorphoses or the myths that he himself changes. But I wanted to think about what is the nature of change. When we think someone is changing, do we think that they're becoming very different from themselves or becoming more of themselves? Do people actually change? Is change a violent occurrence, or is change something that occurs through love? This poem rewrites the myth of Pasiphae, and the only thing you need to know about that original myth, if you care to know, you don't actually have to know it, is that Pasiphae was the mother of the Minotaur who falls madly in love. She's cursed to fall madly in love with a bull. So I will read my contemporary revision of that. Pasiphae. So after M died, she turned to the dog. His copper eyes, the sinewy haunch muscles, the way he perched by the door of M's study as if sensing the body he missed behind it. Something she would not let herself feel, dry-eyed at the funeral, refusing to gather up the pants that still hung in his closet, beneath which the dog slept, breathing in M's last particles until, out of some extravagant kindness or pity, she gave the dog one of his sweaters. She watched as the dog circled and pawed at it, tearing at the tissuey material in his attempts to fall asleep. Impossible not to love such need, she thought, telling herself it was this passion to come as close as possible to what he'd never possessed that attracted her. She could not stop touching him, pulling him to her, gathering up the thick folds of neck skin between her fingers, kneading into her palms the hot popcorn smell of his feet, his ears. Waking in bed to a misty smear spread across her sheets, red welts on her chest from where he scratched and bit her. She wanted to make the dog feel for her some part of what was powerful about his grief for M. She even began to hate M's things, the cashmere sweater now tossed in the trash, books and pants burned, pictures of him swept off the bedroom shelf. Grief, her mother said when she came to visit, excusing her daughter's furious disposals. Though be careful you don't lose control of yourself, she warned, as if too much feeling must be a diminishment. The same lecture she'd been given in high school the night a boy came hours late for a date, and still she ran uncomplainingly to meet him. "Aren't you ashamed of yourself?" her mother had said upon her return, meaning how willingly she had let herself be debased. But love was a debasement. In their first few months of courtship, Em had liked to crawl at her feet during sex, eating the crackers she held out as communion wafers, dressed in the priest's black chasuble he'd found for them, some nightmare-colored sheath he'd scared up from a local theater closet. And she'd indulged him. Their marriage, their sex, she couldn't help it. Even when he asked her to beat him, she did it. She'd never seen anyone want something so nakedly before. 3 months after Em's death, the dog got fleas, and she watched him, mesmerized, scratch at the thin skin of his ears, biting at his legs and belly until they bled, until she too let herself become infested with them. Her clothes, her sheets speckled with the fat black pinheads feasting on them both, the blood they shared raising welts over her ribs. One body, Em once said as they lay, tangled together, her legs pressed between his, or was it his between hers? Their long limbs muscular and bare, covered in the late afternoon light with the same fine gold furs of hair. How close she'd come to really loving him. "You must get rid of that animal," her mother declared one night at the kitchen table, horrified by her necklace of bites, her wolfish eating habits. How greedily she ate, the sad result, her mother said, of living too long alone. "You're little better than that dog," her mother scolded, at which point she rose from the table, tossed her food to the floor, and got down on all fours to eat it. Sorry, I always laugh at that. It's kind of, I'm just gonna, I do have a dog, but we're just friends. And I'll end with a short poem. Telling the wasps. It wasn't the bees I thought to tell, but wasps the evening you died. Not things that fly from earth to the underworld bearing sweetness on their wings. Grief made me bitter. And so in bitterness, I went to seek what roots among the mud and leaves, hanging its home in ashes. I wanted to believe this world would be our only one. What other streams could run more cold? What trees bloom with darker fruit? I was happy here once, as were you. I wanted to stay and grieve in the failing world where we were human together. And so I fell among the wasps, whispering your name into the hole I scooped beside the marshy winter creek, where wind now scours the freezing water, where reed on broken reed hums its numb refrain, and love turns in its mud home and sleeps.